Hello everybody. Welcome again to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. We're sorry we couldn't be with you on Monday, but we had a really big storm come through here and it took out the power. So we were having a few problems dealing with that. But we're back with the story for you today. And the story that we have for you today comes from Europe, and it comes from the country called Spain. This is the story about the importance of following directions. This is a story of the 3 oranges. Once long ago, there were 3 brothers, and they lived with their mother in a house. Their father had died. And the 3 brothers were getting old enough now that they thought it might be time for them to get married. But none of the girls in their little village really appealed to them. They were all friends, but they weren't girls they wanted to marry. And so to try to think of how they could find wives for themselves, they went and visited the old wise woman who lived on the edge of town. Now, everybody in town was just a little bit afraid of the old wise woman because she was a little bit odd, and some people thought she might be a witch. Well, the 3 brothers, they decided they didn't believe all of that rumors and stuff. And so they went to the wise woman to ask for her advice about what they could do about finding themselves some brides. Well, she asked them, "What do you want in a wife?" And the oldest brother said, "Well, I want the most beautiful woman in the world. I want my wife to be very beautiful." "All right," said the wise woman. And the second brother, he said, "Well, I'm quite poor, so I would very much like a rich wife, the richest in the world, so that we would never have to worry about if we were going to have food or how we were going to get new clothes or new shoes or anything like that." "All right," said the wise woman, "and what about you?" And the youngest brother looked at her and said, I'm sorry, I was thinking about something else. What did you ask us?" And his brothers laughed at him. But the wise woman repeated her question, and the brother thought about it for a moment, and the youngest brother said, "I would like a wife who would love me as much as I would love her, and that would be so much. I want a wife that I can love." "Very well," said the wise woman. "Then I have a solution for you. 3 days' walk from here, there is a castle. You just follow the road east. In 3 days, you will arrive at a castle. It has a great orchard next to it, full of oranges. What you must do is go into that orchard and find the one tree with just 3 oranges on it. Do not damage the tree. Pick those oranges and bring them back to me, and then we shall see what we shall see. But remember, do not damage the tree." "Very well, that didn't sound too difficult. Go on a long walk for 3 days, find a tree with 3 oranges, pick the oranges, bring them back, and then they'll get their brides. Not too difficult at all." And so the 3 brothers started out walking. Well, the end of the first day, they were rather tired, as you would expect after you've been walking all day. And they found a friendly farmer who would let them sleep in his barn for the night. And so they all went to bed. Well, about halfway through the night, the eldest brother woke up. The moon was shining in the window, and she was shining in his face. And he woke up, and he looked at his brother sleeping there, and he said, "Well, you know, I am the oldest brother, so I should get the best orange. But if we go there together, my brothers will argue with me about that. So I think I'm going to go on ahead, and I will pick the best orange for myself, and I'll go back to the old woman on my own." And so he did just that. He started walking, and he walked, and he walked, and in fact, he walked so fast that he arrived at the castle the very next morning. Well, he walked in, the very next evening. And he saw that the gate to the orchard was standing open. And so he went into the orchard and he started looking. Now, the problem is, an orchard is a lot of trees, and usually they have fruit on them. Well, this happened to be an orange orchard. So it was a lot of trees with oranges on them. And he was looking for one tree with 3 oranges, just 3 oranges on it. It was not easy to find. But eventually he found one very large tree in the back corner of the orchard that was half full of orange blossoms and half full of unripe fruit. But right in the center, there was one branch with 3 very large, very perfect oranges on it. He saw that tree and he ran right up to it, and suddenly he realized those oranges were higher up than he had thought they were. Now he very much wished he had not left his brothers behind, because if his brothers had been there, they could have just stood on each other's shoulders and picked those oranges very easily without damaging the tree, because he did remember that the wise woman said not to damage the tree. Well, the oldest brother happened to be good at climbing trees, and so he thought perhaps he could climb up into the tree and pick the biggest of those 3 oranges for himself, and then swing down out of the tree and go home. But as he started to climb the tree, he put his foot on a branch that wasn't quite as sturdy as he thought it was, and it broke off and with a loud crack and tumbled down to the ground below him. And suddenly, although the brother tried very hard to get out of the tree, he found that he was stuck to the trunk, as if someone had glued him there. And there was a great noise from the castle, and suddenly a big group of soldiers came pouring out of the door, and there was an old man with them who had very rich clothing on. He looked like maybe he might be the nobleman who had owned that castle. And the soldiers came out and they surrounded the tree. And the old man came up and he looked at the brother in the tree, and he just prodded him with his stick, just poked him with the walking stick he was carrying. And suddenly the brother found he could move again. And so he climbed down from the tree. Well, when he climbed down from the tree, those soldiers took hold of him and they took him into the castle and they threw him into the dungeon. Well, the next morning, his 2 brothers woke up, and they discovered their oldest brother was gone. And the middle brother said, he's going to take the best orange for himself. We'd better hurry. And so they started walking again. But they didn't walk as fast as their older brother had, and so they had to sleep one more night. And they found a nice peddler who let them sleep in his cart. But it was kind of cramped with 3 people sleeping in there, the peddler and the 2 brothers. And halfway through the night, the middle brother woke up and he just was very uncomfortable. And he looked up and he thought, my brother has probably already gotten to the orange grove and he's already taken the best orange. And my little brother, he's so silly, he'll probably mess something up when we get there. I'd better go on ahead and make sure that I get a good orange too. And so he did. He left his younger brother there asleep in the peddler's cart, and he went on to the castle himself, and he walked so quickly that he arrived the very next morning. Well, he walked up to the castle and he saw the open door into the orchard, and he went into the orchard and he looked around and realized it was an orange orchard, and he was going to have a very hard time finding one tree with, 2 oranges on it, he thought. But then he realized there was a path in the grass in front of him. And so he followed that path, thinking very wisely that it might be his brother's path and it might lead him to the orange tree. And it did. And when he arrived, he saw that there were 3 oranges on the one branch on the tree. Now he wished he hadn't left his younger brother behind because he couldn't reach them himself. And if his younger brother had been there, he could have climbed on his shoulders and gotten those oranges down. But he remembered what the wise woman had said about not damaging the tree. And he also noticed that there was a spot right there up the tree where there was a branch that was newly broken off. And he could see that branch laying on the ground. He thought for a moment, and then he thought, perhaps if I took that branch that's lying on the ground and I hit the tree branch with it, maybe the oranges will fall down. And so he did. He picked up the branch, and no sooner had he hit the branch of the tree with it than the soldiers came pouring out of the castle, and they took him too and threw him too into the dungeon. Well, the very next morning, the youngest brother woke up in the peddler's cart, and he realized that both of his brothers now had gone on ahead of him to the orange grove. And he wasn't worried about them taking the best oranges. No. He was afraid his brothers might be in trouble. For you see, he thought about it, and he thought, if my oldest brother made it there and got an orange, he should have come back by now. And my younger brother, the next older brother, he should be on his way back by now too. And he was a little worried. So he hurried, and he got to the castle about midday. Well, when he arrived at the castle, he too found the orchard gate open. And he too went in and found that it was all oranges and was a little worried about finding the tree, but he too saw the path in the grass, and he followed it. Well, when he arrived at the tree, he saw the broken off branch, where it had broken off of the trunk of the tree, and he saw the branch lying in the grass nowhere near the trunk of the tree. And he had a pretty good guess what had happened. One of his brothers had tried to climb the tree, and the other one had tried to hit the tree. So now the youngest brother was thinking. And he thought for a while, and he stood under the tree, looking at the tree, looking at the oranges, and then he had an idea. And he backed up as far back as he could go. And he came running toward the tree, and he took a big jump, and he reached up, and he grabbed one of the oranges, and he pulled on it. But when he came back down to the ground, he found that he had all 3 oranges. But he also had the branch that they were attached to. And as he came down to the ground, suddenly he heard the tree cry out in pain. And the door of the castle opened, and the old man came out, the one who looked like he might be the lord of the castle. And he came up and he stood in front of the youngest brother, and he said, well, you have the oranges, so they will protect you. But because you broke a branch off of the tree, trouble will follow you. And he turned around and he went back into the castle. Well, the youngest brother, he wondered what had happened to his older brothers, and he thought perhaps the old man in the castle might know. And so he too walked up to the gates of the castle, and when they stayed closed in front of them, he reached out with the branch and the oranges, and he touched the gate, and the doors swung open. And the younger brother went into the castle, and every time he came to a door that was closed, he touched it with the branch of oranges, and the door swung open. And in this way, he explored the castle for a while until he finally found the cellars, and just below that, the dungeons. And so he went into the dungeon, and he found his 2 brothers in their cells, and he opened the doors, and his brothers were very happy to see him, and they thanked him very much for getting them out of the dungeons. And they were just about to leave when they looked around, and they realized that right there on a shelf in the dungeon, there were 3 loaves of bread and 3 jugs of wine. And they knew it was going to be a long journey home, and so they each took a loaf of bread and a jug of wine with them to take and eat and drink on the way home. Well, in Spain, it tends to be a little warm when you're walking for a very long time. And these brothers, of course, had to walk for another 3 days to get home. Well, at the end of the first day, the two older brothers had already eaten all of their bread and drunk all of their wine. The youngest brother, he had eaten a little bit of it and drunk a little bit of his wine, but every time he would pick up his hand to take a drink or something, it would wave the smell of the oranges toward him, and suddenly he wasn't so hungry or so thirsty. The oranges smelled so wonderful. Well, that night they lay down to sleep in a nice open field. And in the middle of the night, the oldest brother woke up, and he was so thirsty. And he looked around, and he couldn't see any water anywhere. And so he decided that he would take one of those oranges, and he would cut it open, and he would eat it. And then he wouldn't be so thirsty. So he did. He went over to the orange branch, and he picked off one of the oranges, and he cut it open with his knife. And as soon as he cut it open with his knife, the orange disappeared, and instead, standing in front of him was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She was so beautiful. He couldn't have even imagined a more beautiful woman, and he fell in love with her immediately. Well, the young woman looked at him, and she said, "Have you any bread I can eat?" And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I ate it all." And she said, "Well, then have you any wine I can drink?" And he said, "I'm sorry. I drank it all." And she said, "Well, then I shall go back into my orange and return to the tree." And she disappeared. Well, the oldest brother was very upset by this, and he felt like the stupidest person in the world. And after a little while, he realized that if he wanted to get the girl back and make her his wife, because he had fallen so much in love with her, that he would need to go back to the castle and find her. And so he did. It took him a little while because he was such a hurry to get there. He kept turning the wrong direction. But eventually he found the castle again. And he started to go towards the orchard, but as soon as he entered the orchard, the door of the castle opened, and the soldiers came running out, and they grabbed him and threw him back in the dungeons. Well, he had been in the dungeons for a couple of hours, and suddenly there was a clanking and a jingling of keys. And the door opened, and a woman walked into the dungeon, and she was just covered in beautiful jewels. She had a crown of diamonds on her head, and a pearl necklace around her neck, and diamonds on her shoes, and diamonds on her dress and her sleeve, and precious stones everywhere, and rings with many different precious stones in them, emeralds and sapphires and pearls and rubies and diamonds, and so many things all over her. Such a beautiful dress and so many beautiful gems on it. The problem was, there were so many beautiful jewels that he couldn't tell if she was a plain girl or a beautiful girl. There was just so many jewels everywhere. That's all he could see. Well, he thought this was a nice young woman, maybe, but he wasn't really sure, and he was so surprised by all of the riches he was seeing that when she said to him, "Time must pass very slowly for you here," he wanted to say, "Well, not anymore now that you're here, my lady," but he couldn't even open his mouth to say it. And after a little while, he finally managed to work up the nerve to say, "Please, my lady, you have so many rich jewels and things. Could you maybe give a few of them to the poor people so that they can build themselves a hospital to take care of their dying and their sick people?" And she said, "Certainly, I can do that." And then she got up and she left the room. And when the jailer came to lock the door, he stuck his head in and he said, "You are a fool. For if you had chosen her, you would be a free man right now." And the oldest brother said, "No, I think that might have only been another kind of a prison. She is far too rich for me." And the jailer locked the door and went away. Now the second brother woke up the very next morning, and because he had also eaten all of his bread and drunk all of his wine, he was very thirsty. And he looked around and he too saw no water anywhere. And so he too decided that he would cut open one of the oranges and eat it, and then he wouldn't be thirsty anymore. And when he picked up that orange and he cut it open, suddenly standing in front of him was the most beautiful young lady with jewels everywhere. Even the buckles on her shoes were diamonds. She had the richest clothing and just gems everywhere. And the oldest brother and the middle brother looked at her and he thought, "My lady, I think I might love you." And she said, "Well, that is well, but have you any bread I can eat?" "Oh, no, I am sorry, my lady, I have eaten it all." "Oh, well then have you any wine I can drink?" "No, my lady, I am sorry, I have drunk it all." "Well then," she said, "I shall return to my orange and go back to my tree." And she disappeared. Well, like his older brother, the middle brother was very upset by this because, of course, he had fallen in love with the rich young woman. She was the perfect bride for him, exactly what he wanted. And so he too decided that it was time to go back to the castle and find his bride. And so he began to walk back to the castle. And like his older brother, he was in such a hurry that he made many wrong turns, but eventually he got there. And as soon as he stepped foot in the orchard, the soldiers came out and they arrested him and they put him in the jail as well. Well, he had been in the dungeons for a couple of hours when he heard the clink of the keys and the door opened and the most beautiful woman he had ever seen walked in. She was wearing a very simple dress, but she was a very beautiful woman, long-haired, beautiful skin, and she smiled, and it was the sweetest smile. Oh my goodness, she was so beautiful. But a woman that beautiful, she would need someone to protect her and to take care of her, and she would surely have many rich suitors who wanted to marry her, and he could not afford, he was a poor man, he could not afford to take care of such a beautiful woman in the way that she should be taken care of. And when the young woman saw the sad look on his face, she said, "Oh, I am so sorry, I must have come in the wrong door." And she turned around and she left. Well, the jailer came to lock the door and he said, "You are a fool. If you had chosen her, you would be a free man right now." No, I do not think that would have been wise," said the middle brother. "I could not have taken care of her properly. I am a poor man." And so the jailer locked the door and went away. Well, when the youngest brother awoke, he found that both of his brothers were gone. And he thought, "I must hurry on home, for my brothers have already taken their 2 oranges and gone back to the old wise woman. And if I do not hurry, I will be late." And so he began walking. But as he was walking, suddenly he became rather thirsty. And he thought that an orange sounded very good. For, he'd been smelling them a whole day before that, and that just sounded very good. And so he took the last orange off of the branch, and he cut it open. And suddenly the orange vanished, and there standing in front of him was a very pretty young woman. And she smiled at him so sweetly that he instantly fell in love with her. And she said to him, "Have you any bread I can eat?" And he said, "Why, yes, of course I do." And he broke a piece off of his loaf of bread and he gave it to her. And she ate it. And she said, "Have you any wine I can drink?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do. I even have a cup here. I'll pour you some and you can have some." And she took the wine and she drank it. And when she was done, she said, "Now we shall be happy together." And so hand in hand, the youngest brother and his bride went home, and they went to the wise woman's house. And the wise woman said to him, and the young man told the wise woman everything that had happened, how they had gone and his brothers had gone first and they'd been captured, and then he had gone and he had jumped up and he had gotten the oranges, but he broke the branch off, and he showed her the branch. He still had it. And then he said, but then I woke up and my brothers were gone, and I cut open the orange and my bride was waiting for me. And the wise woman said, well, that is well, but because you have broken the branch, I think you shall have some trouble. And she went up and she shook the young man's hand. And then she said, but you have gotten a very sweet bride. And she went over to greet the young woman. And as she reached up to touch her on the head and give her a blessing, she took a pin out of her shawl and she stuck it into the back of the young woman's head. And suddenly, the young woman disappeared. And all that was left was a white dove fluttering about the young man in a very worried fashion. Well, of course, the youngest brother was very upset that his bride had just disappeared like that, and he looked everywhere for her. And he went to ask the wise woman what had happened to her, but he couldn't find the wise woman either. Finally, he decided he just needed to go home and tell his mother everything that had happened. And so he did. And that white dove, she would not leave him alone. She flew along beside him and fluttered about his head and rested on his shoulder whenever he would stop. And so he went home and he told his mother what happened. And of course his mother was very sad to have lost her 2 older sons, but she still had her youngest son and the beautiful white dove that had come home with him. Well, one day, after they had lived a little while together, more or less happily, the mother noticed that the white dove kept scratching at its head with its foot, kept scratching at its head. And so she went over to see what might be the problem, and as she touched the white dove's head, she felt a bump there. And she pulled the feathers back, and she noticed that there was someone has driven a pin into the back of this poor bird's head. Who would do such a cruel thing? And she took the pin and she pulled it out. And instantly the white dove was gone and the beautiful young woman was back. And the youngest brother was overjoyed to see his bride again, and he was so very happy. But she looked at him and she said, what have you done with the branch? And he said, well, I threw it out into the garbage. I didn't think we needed it anymore. She said, we must go back to the castle, and we must go now. And so he and his mother and his bride started out right away, and they got back to the castle in less than 3 days. And when they got back to the castle, they found the gate to the orchard wide open. And the brother and his bride went in, and they went to the back corner, and they found, much to the youngest brother's surprise, that the branch was back on the tree, and so were the 2 other oranges. And he bent down and he said to his bride, climb up on my shoulders, and you can reach the oranges and pick them off. And so she did. She climbed up on his shoulders, and she picked the 2 oranges, and no sooner had she gotten back down on the ground than those 2 oranges vanished, and the 2 other young women were standing there, the very beautiful one and the one covered in jewels. And she embraced them, for you see, they were her sisters. And just then, the gate to the castle opened wide, and the old man came out, the man who owned the castle, the nobleman who owned the castle. And the soldiers came out with them, bringing the 2 older brothers. And the young bride, she took the hand of each of her sisters, and she walked them over, and she put each of their hands into the hands of the young men, of the brothers, who were going to marry them. And the old man, he came up to the youngest brother, and he said, thank you very much. And then he turned around to the tree, and he took his walking stick, and he tapped the branch that the 3 oranges had hung on. And suddenly it fell down from the tree, and as it hit the ground, it turned into a beautiful older woman. And the old man turned to the 3 brothers and their mother, and he said, I am the lord of this castle. And one day I lost my temper, and I became very angry with my wife. And this is she. And I turned her into the branch, and I banished her and my 3 daughters to the orchard. And I am so glad that you have come and that you have broken the spell and that you have taken, you will now have my 3 daughters to be your wives. And you know, they were all 3 of them married, and they lived very happily for the rest of their lives. But the youngest brother and his bride, they were the happiest of all. And that is the story of the 3 oranges that comes to us from Spain. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us again on Monday at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We will have another story for you from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Bye.